Pause. There's a version of the story being told about this life that feels flattering, safe, and familiar. It's the one whispered late at night. You are the good one. You just need a break. You would do the right thing if the system weren't so unfair. And maybe that's true, but here's the sting. What if the system that breaks people also lives inside, quietly arranging the mind so that self-interest wears the mask of virtue? What if the story told to feel seen is precisely the one that keeps the deepest parts from being seen at all? Look closely at the small compromises from this week. The message left unanswered because answering would make obligations real. The silence when a colleague's credit was taken because speaking up would cost status. The white lie that softened the truth but distorted responsibility. None of these make anyone a villain. They make a person human. But that's the trap. The most dangerous corruptions never feel like betrayals. They feel like reasonable adjustments, justified by a private narrative of survival or goodness. Self-deception is the warm blanket that smothers the conscience while claiming to protect it. Nietzsche warned that noble lies are not merely political. They're psychological technologies the self employs to keep living with itself. We remain unknown to ourselves. He wrote, "We are not seekers of knowledge, but of comfort. The mind will sell out truth if the price is reassurance." Plato saw this centuries earlier in the allegory of the cave. The prisoners aren't just chained by others. They're kept by their own desire to avoid the pain of seeing too much, too fast. The eyes burn in the light, and so we turn back to the shadows, because it is easier to feel righteous in the dark than uncertain in the sun. This isn't a condemnation. It's a mirror. The mirror is frightening because it shows that everyday goodness can become a performance. Well-lit, tasteful, applauded, while the backstage is staffed by fear and hunger. Fear of exclusion, hunger for significance. People don't wake up wanting to be false. They sign 1,000 tiny contracts with comfort until they can no longer tell who authored the signature. Machiavelli's most unsettling insight wasn't that rulers are cruel. It's that incentives quietly tutor morality. When a world rewards appearances, character becomes costume. When institutions prize loyalty over truth, truth-tellers look disloyal. When the metrics favor speed, care looks inefficient. People adapt, not because they are evil, but because evolution punishes those who refuse to play and applauds those who learn the rules. And then the mind does something subtle. It writes a kinder story about what just happened. I wasn't dishonest. I was diplomatic. I didn't avoid responsibility. I preserve harmony. Story is the anesthetic. Self-deception is the surgeon. Dietrich Bonhoeffer understood this during the darkest hours of the last century. Evil often arrives in the form of reasonable people, doing what is expected of them, staying quiet because quiet feels responsible. He wrote about cheap grace, forgiveness without transformation, virtue without cost, belief without obedience. There's an equivalent in character, cheap integrity, the idea of oneself as courageous, truthful, compassionate, without undergoing the losses that make those words real. Cheap integrity is a luxury brand. The label is expensive, the stitching is not. Here's a harder truth. Many principles are negotiable precisely at the point where they become expensive. The test isn't whether values are held, it's whether a person pays for them. Plato understood this in the Republic. Justice is not a concept, it is a discipline. The ordering of the soul so that the appetite does not bully reason, and reason does not justify appetite. But that ordering is maintenance. Machiavelli, cities decay. Character drifts unless tended. Think about the last time a choice felt cleanly moral in the abstract and messy on contact. Tell the truth and risk losing the client. Set a boundary and watch a friend withdraw. Admit a mistake and step into the humiliation of being ordinary. The world tells a story where the moral path is accompanied by quiet pride, the music swelling behind like a film score. The reality is that it often comes with embarrassment, losses, misunderstandings, and silence. Many do the math and choose what costs less, then rename it wisdom. There's a twist here. Self-deception isn't just about hiding wrongdoing. It's about impersonating strength. The strong persona is a fortress built to keep out the pain of being fragile. Nietzsche warned about this too. Those who proclaim their independence, the loudest, often remain tethered to the gaze of others, performing autonomy for an audience. A person can live alone and still be crowded by approval. Solitude becomes costume if it isn't devotion to truth. Loneliness is not a philosophy, it's a signal. Another twist: virtue can make a person dangerous. Not because goodness is bad, but because the memory of goodness can license harm. Psychologists call it moral licensing. I did something kind, so I've earned a little selfishness. This is how people with beautiful intentions drift into ugly outcomes. It's how a leader who once served becomes the leader who now deserves. It's how generosity turns into leverage. The self keeps the receipts. The conscience doesn't read the fine print. Now, turn to power, not the governmental kind, the household kind, the friend group kind, the workplace kind. Power is the ability to define reality for others with minimal resistance. When power is gained, the first impulse of the untrained soul is not to ask, "How can I be accountable?" but to ask, "How can I be safe?" And safety becomes the justification for bending rules. I can't tell them the truth. They won't understand. I shouldn't delegate. I'm protecting the mission. Here's another uncomfortable truth. The most refined form of control is benevolence. People are easier to govern when they believe they're being loved. And often they're being loved, but also arranged. So what breaks the spell? Not shame. Shame is theater for the ego. It keeps the attention on the self, not the truth. Not cynicism. Cynicism is lazy sophistication. It feels like wisdom because it sounds tired. What breaks the spell is sobriety, the quiet ability to audit one's motives without romance. To ask, as Marcus Aurelius did, "What is this in itself?" And to ask again when the first answer is too flattering. To run a friction test. If a value is real, where does it chafe? If a belief is honest, what does it cost? If a relationship is love, where is the freedom? There is an ancient practice for this, scattered across traditions. Call it confession if that word fits, or examination if it doesn't. Each night, ask 3 questions. Where did comfort rename itself virtue today? Where did fear call itself prudence? Where did I require understanding from others that I didn't offer in return? Try what stings, not because punishment purifies, but because the unvarnished sentence restores oxygen to the soul. The furnace of character is built on clean air. But self-auditing alone isn't enough, because the self is a gifted attorney. It argues brilliantly on its own behalf. Plato's solution was the city of the soul. Build structures that counterweight appetite. Have someone in life with permission to say, "That story is too convenient." Rotate roles. Expose the work. Commit publicly to standards that can be measured by others. Machiavelli, stripped of the cynicism assigned to him, understood that good intentions need architecture. Incentives are stronger than slogans. A calendar that makes time for reflection is more moral than a bookshelf that performs it. Here's a paradox. Those pursuing truth will often feel less righteous, not more. As clarity increases, the capacity for self-justification shrinks. The halo dims, the human shows. This can feel like failure. In fact, it is progress. The person who worries about being a hypocrite is already closer to honesty than the person who performs sincerity without doubt. Bonhoeffer would call this costly grace, the relief that doesn't come free, the forgiveness that rebuilds something real. Consider a small story. A teacher discovers that a student cheated. The policy is strict: report, fail, notify guardians. The student is carrying burdens the policy never imagined. Compassion whispers, bend the rule. But bending the rule for one person, quietly, doesn't create justice. It creates discretion, which is another word for private power. There is a different courage available. Hold the boundary and build a second path. Report, and then offer to walk with the student through the consequences, mentor them, help them retake, advocate for structural change, so policies allow for context next time. This is what love looks like when it refuses to be sentimental. It is tenderness with a spine. Now widen the lens. Why do so many people withdraw from society and call it awakening? Sometimes it is courage, refusing the noise so the signal can be heard. Sometimes it is avoidance, retreating to avoid the humiliations of repair. Solitude is a forge or a refuge, often both. The question isn't whether a person steps back, it's what they bring back. If solitude returns as contempt, it was isolation. If it returns as clarity and patience, it was apprenticeship. A third twist: the desire to see through others can mask the fear of being seen by them. The skill of reading people can become the hobby of staying invulnerable. The heart becomes a critic's desk. This is why some who see through society feel perpetually exiled. They do not trust anyone to hold their truth, and so they hold everyone at a distance long enough to be right about how alone they are. The cure is not naivety. It is chosen exposure, the terrifying act of letting one person, then another, witness the imperfect center without being auditioned first. So where does this leave the one listening, the one who wants to be good without becoming a performance of goodness? Start dangerously small. Choose one principle that is easy to praise and hard to practice. Make it specific, not poetic. I will not speak about people who are not in the room unless I would say the same words with them present. Then keep a tally for a week. The tally is the teacher. Move one layer closer to consequence. If a decision's risk is borne by someone else, bring some of it back to the self. Power is safest when it is felt. Rotate cherished narratives. If a person is always the hero in their retellings, ask where they were the obstacle. If they're always the victim, ask where they were the agent. Character grows in the space where stories lose their absolutes. Understand this. The choice is not between being pure and being corrupt. The choice is between being maintained and being unmanaged. Corruption is not a monster at the gate. It is dust in the gears. Left long enough, the machine still turns until it doesn't. The antidote is cadence. Small, stubborn acts of alignment repeated until they groan less and sing more. Integrity is not a feeling. It is choreography. Machiavelli said that people are moved by hope and fear. Perhaps the wiser arrangement is different. Be moved by hope, governed by truth, checked by structure, and softened by mercy. Nietzsche asked whether a person could become who they are. That is not a call to self-expression. It is a call to self-construction. Plato's guardians learned music and gymnastics because the soul needs both harmony and strength. Bonhoeffer taught that freedom is not the space where nothing restrains. It is the place where a person binds themselves to what is right, even when the price is real. And here is the last discomfort. The world may never applaud this. It may even punish it. That doesn't make it futile. It makes it meaningful. A life arranged around appearances will always be at the mercy of mirrors. A life arranged around truth however imperfectly, begins to generate its own light. People notice, even if they pretend not to. They cannot help it. Reality leaks. So breathe. Let the charming story about the self sit on the shelf for a while. Step into the quieter room where the sentences are straighter and the costs are counted. Ask the one question that breaks all convenient narratives. What would it take for me to get caught by reality? Then build the conditions that make being caught likely. Feedback, exposure, consequence. Because the person who makes it hard to lie to themselves becomes difficult to corrupt, even by their own fear and longing. The world doesn't need more perfect people. It needs more honest apprentices, not saints on pedestals, but citizens who choose the slow, unfashionable labor of ordering their souls. Be one. Fail. Adjust. Pay the cost again. And perhaps one day, without theatrics, discover that goodness has stopped performing and started breathing. Quietly, stubbornly, like a heart that refuses to lie.